Please be seated. The court is now back in session. Once again, the floor is given to Judge Lavance to continue putting questions to this witness. You may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Witness, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Judge.
Bien.
Well, I have three last questions to ask you. The first one regards the reasons that made you want to return to democratic Cambodia. What were these reasons?
En 1964.
In 1975.
My reason was like the reasons of all my other colleagues. Because the war ended in our country after the 17th April 1975, we applauded, and the students who completed their study wanted to return to the country to help in its rebuilding. Secondly, the students who had come for several years studying in France wanted to return to find and unite with their family members. And I was in the same position. However, as I stated from the beginning, I lodged my application, but I was not called for the interview because my eldest son was born in May 1975, which was less than 1 month after the liberation.
So, therefore, you had full trust in the authorities of democratic Cambodia. You felt that they would receive Cambodians in a benevolent way.
Yes, that is correct, John.
And one of the... wasn't your trust based on the fact that Khieu Samphan had a prominent role among the leaders of democratic Cambodia?
Mr. Khieu Samphan's role at the time, as I knew it, he was the president of the state presidium. And of course, if he could live in the country, I could also live in the country. And that's where I placed my trust. And my colleagues who returned to Cambodia, they were in several numbers.
And witness, I have another question for you. Maybe you already answered this question, I'm not sure of it. Maybe I didn't understand your answer correctly, but I'll put it to you again. Well, among the members of your family, did you know a certain Mr. Chao Seng?
I know Chao Seng, but I am not related to him. Mr. Chao Seng and I came from the same place, that is my place of birth, Svai Tong, and I met him in France before he's returning to Cambodia. But at that time he was not a Paris resident, he stayed in another city.
Monsieur Chao Sang était
Was Mr. Chao Seng a friend of Mr. Kyosampan?
I do not know the level of their friendship because he was quite much older than me, and I came to France in 1967 at a time where I was still pretty young. And after the coup d'etat, Mr. Chao Seng participated in the Fung, but I did not know the level of their relationship.
donc vous ne savez pas s'ils ont
So you don't know if they studied together in Montpellier, or if they joined the same leftist movements, or if they met when they were in the government during Sihanouk's regime.
When he studied at Montpellier, I was still young and I did not know whether they knew each other well. But I only met him actually at the front, that is prior to the liberation of the 17th April 1975. I met him in Paris, but it was not frequent. And of course, I knew that Mr. Chao Seng was a progressive person, and I knew that since I was a teenager back in Cambodia.
et savez-vous
And do you know where Chao Seng died?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
Well, I don't know if this is permissible, but I believe that Chao Seng died at S21. Mr. President, I have no further questions to put to the witness, and I would like to thank him for his cooperation.
Thank you, Judge. The floor is now given to the prosecution to put questions to this witness. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chao Sokan. My name is Keith Rayner, and I am one of the prosecutors in this case. Can I check, please, first of all, that you can hear me?
Good afternoon, Mr. Prosecutor. Yes, I can hear you clearly.
I'd like to start, please, by asking you some questions about crimes of violence. Do you consider that if a person is arrested and executed, that constitutes a crime of violence?
It is my personal understanding, and it is not related to any event. Any criminal needs to be put on trial.
Do you consider executing somebody to be a crime of violence? Yes or no?
An execution of someone without a trial is not appropriate. This is my understanding.
What information did you receive from 1975 to 1979 about arrests and executions in democratic Cambodia?
During the regime that is from 1975 to 1979, we did not receive any news from Democratic Cambodia. We only learned of the news minimally from the press, and only later we learned of the conflict of Democratic Cambodia and Vietnam. But I did not receive any first-hand news from Cambodia during that period.
Mr. Chow Sok-an, documents on our case file, including, and I'm going to give the numbers for Council, D313/1.2.3.74, E3/1243, E3/984. These documents collectively, Mr. Chow Sok-an, show that the Committee of Patriots in Paris published or broadcast the following material: the Democratic Kampuchea Constitution, firstly. Secondly, Phnom Penh radio broadcasts. Thirdly, speeches by Pol Pot. Fourthly, speeches by Ieng Sary. Fifthly, a speech by Khieu Samphan given in Colombo in 1976. Next, the third anniversary speech by Khieu Samphan. Next, material in March 1977 through Nouvelles du Cambodge, and also a monthly pictorial magazine. Is it your evidence that during your time in Paris, with the connections you had with the Committee of Patriots, that you did not see any of the material I have just gone through?
I do not have the documents that you just referred to in front of me now. However, I can say, based on my recollection, the documents broadcast on the radio were dependent on whether we would receive it or not. And if we receive the document, then we would copy those documents for the distributions. But I cannot recall the specific documents that you just referred to.
So I understand your evidence correctly. Are you saying that certain documents were published by the Committee of Patriots in Paris, given to you, you then copied them and distributed them further?
Yes, I can say that I copied them and distributed them, but I cannot recall the exact documents that I distributed at the time, nor any document of that nature in front of me at the moment. It's been almost 40 years, so I cannot recall all those documents. And we do not have these kinds of documents with me now.
Did you go once or more than once to pick up documents? And can you remember where you went when you picked up the documents?
Personally, I did not go to pick up the document. It was the Cambodian embassy in Beijing who sent the documents via post through the address of the association. This is my recollection of the event.
So, was your only involvement to copy these documents, or did you have any other connection with the Committee of Patriots?
I was a member of the association, an active member actually. So the distribution was not part of the broadcast. In fact, the broadcast would be a complete coverage of the document, and whoever read the document and whatever they thought of the document was up to the views of the readers.
At that time, how interested were you in obtaining up-to-date information from your homeland?
Of course, the news that we received was not up-to-date news. It's not as efficient as it is currently, because at that time the delivery was through the post office, so it took some time before the news reached us.
Right, take a pause, please, Mr. Chow Sok-an, and think about my next question. Please describe exactly what your contact was with the Committee of Patriots.
Mr. Prosecutor, I just spoke about that. Maybe you did not hear it. Let me repeat. I was a member of that committee or association, but in fact it is an association. It's not a political committee. Based on the European structure, it was indeed an association.
You've mentioned a visit to Romania in 1974. Document number E3/3315, being a US State Department document, shows that that visit had concluded by the 2nd of May 1974. In March 1974, events happened in Udon. Are you aware of a broadcast or information coming from Khieu Samphan on the 5th of April 1974 when he stated this? And I refer for these purposes to E3/167. I quote, "On the 18th of March, our People's National Liberation Armed Forces liberated another city, Udon, by annihilating all the puppet soldiers there, along with their reinforcements. In other words, over 5,000 enemies were eliminated, 1,500 of whom were captured." Close quote. Did that information ever come to you?
Allow me to say that I do not have the document that you just referred to in front of me. And secondly, during the time that I met with Khieu Samphan, it was brief, and Khieu Samphan never gave us detailed information. This is my recollection of the event. And I cannot recall anything related to the event occurring in Udong.
So we're as clear as you can be, given the lapse of time. Is it your evidence that, to the best of your recollection, Khieu Samphan never mentioned to you in Romania annihilating enemies?
It is my recollection that he spoke about the general situation, but not any specific situation such as Udong. I cannot even recall the word Udong.
Thank you. Do I understand your evidence correctly, that based on your knowledge of Khieu Samphan, he made no contribution from 1975 to 1979, for instance, on the policy of arresting and executing people?
What I can tell the court is based on my understanding that between 1975 to 1979, arrests were not part of the responsibility of the President of the State Presidium. For that reason, he was not connected to this kind of events, and he would not have the authority to do so. This is my understanding.
Mr. Chau Sok-An, do you know that Khieu Samphan has admitted to the investigating judges in this case that he, together with Duan, were the only two members of an office called Office 870? Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't, Mr. Prosecutor.
Do you know that Khieu Samphan has stated to the Office of the Co-Investigating Judges that one of the functions of Office 870 was to monitor suspected members of the party on behalf of the Standing Committee?
No, I don't.
Did you know that the chairman of Office 870 had the duty to keep track of the implementation of Standing Committee's policy decisions?
No, I don't.
Do you know that Office 870 was one of the offices given authority to make decisions on smashing people within and outside the ranks of the Communist Party of Cambodia?
No, I don't, Mr. Prosecutor.
Do you know that in a Voice of America interview, E3/630, Khieu Samphan told the interviewer that he worked in Office 870?
I do not know about this information because I rarely listen to the VOA broadcast.
Do you know that in this interview, Khieu Samphan said, describing Office 870, that this was, quotes, my office, close quotes?
No, I do not know that.
Did you know that in this document, Mr. Kyu Sompon gave information about Duan being arrested?
No, I don't.
Do you know that in an interview between Ing Sari and a professional called Stephen Hedder on the 4th of January 1999, that Ing Sari confirmed that Kyu Sompon was appointed to the chairmanship of Office 870?
No, I don't, Mr. Prosecutor.
Do you have any knowledge of Kyu Sompan working directly with Pol Pot to ensure the proper implementation of decisions?
Regarding the working relationship between Pol Pot and Kyu Sampon, it was beyond my knowledge because I was overseas.
Are you aware that Kyu Sompon has told the investigating judge in this case that he did not learn of any single arrest before 1979?
No, I don't. How should I know? Because he spoke to the co-investigating judges, not to me.
Did Kyu Sompon ever say anything to you about his knowledge of arrests?
No, he didn't. He didn't talk to me about the arrests in Paris when I met him, because he was there to prepare for the Paris Peace Accord, and he did not mention about any arrests.
Have the defence team or any others ever shown you a document from the Standing Committee of the 8th of March 1976 showing that Kyu Sompon attended a Standing Committee meeting when arrests were mentioned?
Response: No, I have had no contact with the Defense Counsel regarding this Khmer Rouge Tribunal or relevant documents at all.
Are you aware that Kyu Sompon has told the investigating judges that he was aware of disappearances of members of the Central Committee and the Standing Committee?
Response: Whatever Kyu Sampon mentioned to the co-investigators is not known to me.
Do you have any explanation for the fact that of 16 former Grunk and Funk colleagues of Kyu Sompon, 9 were executed during the DK period?
Response: I only knew about the execution at a very later date. It is after the 1979 when I heard about this news on newspapers. Early on, this piece of information would never be communicated to us, and there was no news about this.
Do you know anything about Kyu Sompon being a note-taker at secret meetings of the Standing Committee?
Response: No, I don't.
Do you know anything? I'm pausing because I see one of my learned friends is on his feet.
The President, National Council for Mr. Kilsampon, you may now proceed. Council Kong Som-on. Thank you, Mr. President. We have noted that Mr. Co-Prosecutor has referred in his questions to some documents, but he has failed to refer to the documents. And when he mentioned that Mr. Kilsampon was a minutes taker or note taker in a meeting of the Standing Committee, he has also failed to refer to that precise document in putting such question. So my humble request is that, Mr. President, the co-prosecutor should be guided to refer to the document before putting the question.
Mr. President, it's entirely valid objection, and I apologise to my learned friend. The last detail was extracting from Stephen Hedder's book, 7 Candidates, E3/48. The English ERN is 00393581, French 007299659, and Khmer 007426117. The footnote in that refers to an article by Nate Thayer called Death in Detail, and it relates to information that came from Doik. Mr. Chow Sok-An, am I right in saying that you have absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of what contact Khieu Samphan had with King Sihanouk during the period 1975 to 1979?
Response: Khieu Samphan's relationship with King Norodom Sihanouk was in place, but to what extent, I don't know. At that time, I knew that Prince Norodom Sihanouk was very close to Mr. Khieu Samphan.
Do I take it right that you have absolutely no knowledge about meetings of the Standing Committee and how often Khieu Samphan attended such meetings?
Response: Yes, you do.
Now, you spoke in part about what was happening with Funk and Grunk after the 17th of April 1975. What, if anything, did you know about a new constitution for democratic Kampuchea and who had written it, if anything?
Response: I understand your question, but who wrote the Constitution? I don't know.
Did you see a copy of the Constitution when you were in Paris? Or any other date when you were in France between 1975 onwards?
Response: No, I didn't. Personally, I didn't.
Did you ever hear anything about elections taking place in Cambodia? Sorry, I should have said after, well, in early 1976.
Response: No, I didn't. I did not know clearly about this, and as I already said that during this period of time, no news would be heard among us.
Did you ever hear anything about a connection between Khieu Samphan and reading out confessions in Cambodia?
Response: I have no idea about this.
Do you remember listening to, at any stage, broadcasts made by Khieu Samphan in 1976 talking about maintaining a spirit of revolutionary vigilance? And can I indicate to my learned friends that that is based on 7 candidates, English ERN 00393584, French 007296661, Khmer 00742620 through to 21. So can I just repeat the question again? Your awareness of speeches by Khieu Samphan in 1976 talking about maintaining a spirit of revolutionary vigilance against their enemies.
The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may be seated now because we have internet connection problem. The President, Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you may now continue. It would be good if you can repeat your question again because it was not properly conveyed to the witness.
Mr. Chow Sok-an, I'm going to repeat my last question. Did you ever listen to a first anniversary speech in April 1976 when Khieu Samphan spoke about people having to maintain a spirit of revolutionary vigilance against their enemies?
Response: No, I didn't at that time.
Did you ever listen to, when you were in France, a second anniversary speech by Khieu Samphan when he spoke of these issues? Firstly, suppressing all categories of enemies. Secondly, wiping out the enemy. Thirdly, doing it neatly and thoroughly. And fourthly, continuing to fight and suppress all stripes of enemy at all times.
Response: No, I didn't.
Did you ever listen to a third anniversary speech which was broadcast by the Committee of Patriots in Paris, in which Samphan spoke of these issues? I refer from a learned friend's note-taking to E3/1389. Firstly, exterminating resolutely all agents of the Vietnamese. Secondly, exterminating resolutely all CIA agents. And thirdly, exterminating the enemies of all stripes.
Response: You mentioned about meeting in Paris. To respond to your question, I didn't hear anything about this because I did not always attend any meetings at this committee in Paris.
How many meetings did you attend of this committee in Paris, approximately?
Response: I do not take note of the frequency, but there were on several occasions that I attended the meetings.
When you attended such meetings, were people ever talking about deaths in Cambodia?
Response: As I already indicated, we did not know anything about this during the period of 1975 and 1979.
I want to be clear, Mr. Sok-an Chow. Is it your evidence to this tribunal that in the whole of the period from 1975 to 1979, when you were in Paris, you never heard anybody that you had any connection with ever speak about deaths through starvation in Cambodia?
Response. It is correct. I never heard anyone mention anything about this.
Did you ever hear about false accusations being made against people?
Response. No, I didn't.
By 1979, relying on the information you had, how many people did you think had died in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979?
Response. No, I didn't know about this because we did not receive any pieces of information from within Cambodia regarding this. Some newspapers may make mention about this, but I cannot, or I am not in a position to say exactly or to tell you whether their judgment was right.
Prior to the liberation of Phnom Penh on the 17th of April 1975, did you listen to any broadcasts speaking about killing the 7 traitors?
Response. No, I didn't.
I want to seek, as Judge Laverne has done, to try and summarise your evidence. Is it fair that you never worked with Khieu Samphan?
Response. Yes, it is. I never worked directly with him.
You never lived in Cambodia from the 1960s onwards. Is that correct?
Response. Yes, it is. I never lived in Cambodia since 1967, but I did pay a visit to my country on some occasions, and as I told you, I went to Cambodia in 2002 and 2005 when I met Mr. Khieu Samphan in Thailand and in On Long Vang. So all in all, I can say that I never remained in Cambodia during this period of time.
You were in Paris. You were a member of the Cambodian community. You sometimes attended meetings of the Committee of Patriots. But I mean, how interested were you in what was going on in your country? Weren't you desperate to get as much information as you could?
Response. I think if we go back to this period of time, at that time there was not enough information for us to analyze. And when it comes to the evacuation of the population, we had to analyze based on the very limited information we obtained.
Final question from me is this. What was the most important document that you read in France about what was going on in Cambodia?
Response. There were not plentiful of important documents that I read, and I find it difficult to respond to your question because at that time we based our analysis or reading of the situation on the very limited sources of information. So with that I can say I don't know how important that piece of information was because we didn't have enough information.
Just one other question. Is it fair for me to summarise? You tell me if I'm wrong. Is it fair for me to summarise that your evidence about the character of Khieu Samphan is based on limited information?
Response. No. When it comes to this information about Khieu Samphan, I think I have gathered ample sources of information over a period of time because he has been always a person who earns my respect, who earns my interest to know about him. But this piece of information did not or were not channeled to me in 1975 through 1979, but over a period of time I gathered more information about him.
Thank you, Mr. Chau Sok-Khan. That ends the questions from the prosecution, and I'd like to hand over, please, to my colleagues, the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
The President. Thank you. Now we would like to hand over to the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties. Counsel Pek Ang. Good afternoon, Mr. President and Your Honors. Counsels Lau Chun-Thi and Pascal O'Boyne will be putting the questions. The President, you may proceed, counsels. Counsel Lau Chun-Thi. Good afternoon, Mr. President and Your Honors. Good afternoon, everyone in this courtroom and everyone outside of this courtroom and those who follow the proceedings through the internet connection. I am Lau Chun-Thi, counsel for the civil parties. I am a lawyer from Legal Aid of Cambodia organization. I have a few questions for you. And good morning to you, Mr. Chau Sok-Kun. Response, good morning, Mr. Lau Chun-Thi. Question first. My question is, you said you were born in Cambodia Crown and you went to Sisawat High School and you educated in Paris. Do you know a person by the name of Chau Sao who was born in Cambodia Crown, or are you related to him? Response. I know Mr. Chau Sao very well because his wife is related to my father. Question. Do you know where he is now? Response. I have lost information about him and his family. Perhaps he and his wife have died. I heard that they died. I just don't know where they died or evacuated to. Question. Did you know what Mr. Chow Sao did and where? Response. He worked at a bank. He was the president of a national credit institution. Question. I have some follow-up questions. The co-prosecutor asked you questions concerning your analysis regarding the evacuation of the people from Phnom Penh. Are you able to tell the chamber how enthusiastic you engaged in discussion about this in France? Response. When it comes to evacuation, we learned very little about this, and I also obtained some information from other individuals who shared the same view. They said, and we agree, that we support the FUNC, and that later on the city was liberated, country was liberated, then the population was evacuated. Our analysis was that in 1975, when the war was still on, and the population of Phnom Penh was small. But during the time when the Americans dropped bombs on the border area and other battlefields, Cambodian people who were terrified by these bombings had to take refuge in the capital city of Cambodia. So the number of people increased to several millions. And food would be shipped from Prenoko by ships or airplanes. So I can say that there was no other option than evacuating the population of Phnom Penh into the rural area, because if bombs were to be dropped in the city, no people could have died other than the civilians, because Phnom Penh was too overcrowded, and that these people had to be returned to where they were from originally. And also, we believed that the evacuation was temporary, because we were convinced also that if the situation was maintained, if the situation was under control at a later date, then these people would then be allowed to return.
Thank you, Mr. Jasakun. You raised a few points in your response, and my question is that, of course, later on you knew that there were hardship facing the people who evacuated, and some died. What is your opinion on that? Answer. Regarding the death of the people, it is a pity that the people died. I was sad of the news. They died of sickness, or they died along the way out. But the question that you need to consider is, if they were not evacuated, what would happen to them? For example, in terms of food supply. And I like to open a bracket here that we have had issues with Vietnam not only after 1979, but it was much longer prior to that. Council interrupts. Thank you, Mr. Chasukun, regarding your rather lengthy statement. But what I really want to hear from you, besides your sorrow for the deaths of the people, and that you said there were no other alternatives regarding this matter, then the question to you is that, was this a common practice elsewhere by the revolution throughout the world? Answer, it is a country dependent. And of course, I am not a leading politician and knows everything for all the country. I only touch upon the issue of what happened in Cambodia and what was the best option at the time. And as I just stated, the issue is to evacuate or not to evacuate. Thank you. Question. Now I go back to the previous question that I asked you regarding Chao Sao. Do you know of the relationship between Khieu Samphan and Chao Sao? Answer, I do not know of their relationship. I went to visit him at his house in Tulkok only for a short period of time. Sometimes I met him, sometimes I did not, and I only met his mother-in-law. Question. Did you know or do you know of his educational background? Answer, in fact, he studied in France, and then he returned, and he then got married with his wife. His wife was a distant relative of my father, and I went to visit him at his house, as I just stated. Thank you. Question. Regarding the statement that you just made, that you made and knew about the Khieu Samphan since you was a teenager, and you also said that you knew quite a lot because you knew about him since 1967 to 2013. You were asked several questions by the prosecution, and in addition, I'd like to ask you this question. During the Democratic Cambodia, did you receive any sensitive news that would make you feel regret? Answer. I did not receive any news, but it is my understanding that I regret for what happened during Democratic Cambodia, because they did not have the opportunity to rebuild the country due to the war situation. And the war started since late 1977, and that's what I regret. The prosecutor asked me that Mr. Khieu Samphan, talked about this or about that to this judge or to that person. I did not know because he did not talk to me about that. Question. Mr. Chasukun, you acknowledge the past activities of Khieu Samphan, and the question is his position, his previous position and his position that you met him last. What did you observe? Was there any change? Answer. It is my opinion that his pure stance remains unchanged. His patriotic stance remains unchanged to me when I met him last time, that is in 2005. And let me repeat, this is my personal opinion. I am of the view, and here I'm only referring to him, I'm of the view that he is a person of rare quality, and I am a witness before this court, is to contribute to the fact findings of this court, because this court is trying to ascertain the truth. And of course, I myself want to find justice for Mr. Kieu Sampon. Thank you. I have another question, Mr. Chao Sukun. In the past, Mr. Kieu Sampon joins the resistance for justice, but after he was in power, did he provide justice to the people? President, Mr. Witness, please observe some pause. There is an objection from the counsel for Mr. Kieu Sampon. Counsel for Mr. Kieu Sampon, you may proceed. Kung Samon, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like Your Honor to direct the assigned lawyer to be specific when he spoke that when Mr. Kieu Sampon came into power, is there any document that he can refer to? If so, please do so. Thank you. Logenti, regarding relevant documents concerning Kieu Sampon, yes, there is a document that he was appointed as the president of the state. So it means he had the power within Democratic Cambodia. President, the chamber is of the view that we need to hear the response from the witness to the question put to him by the assigned lawyer for civil party. For that reason, the objection is not sustained. Mr. Witness, you are now instructed to respond to the last question put to you by the assigned lawyer for civil parties. Witness. It is easy for me to respond. Of course, in all the newspapers and the media in the West, they all said about the nominal role of Khieu Samphan. Khieu Samphan was only a nominal head of state, and it is well known throughout the West. Thank you, says the council. In document E3/1701, which is the confession of Lieng Serai-Wood, who writes in his confession that Mr. Chao Sukun is within the link of Three Mayhood. Answer: yes, I know Three Mayhood. He was in the same class with me. However, counsel, that kind of confession cannot be used because it was obtained under torture. Lajanti, thank you, Mr. Chao Sakun. I have no further question for you, and I'd like to hand the floor to my colleague. Thank you, Mr. President. Court officer, can you check with the AV unit whether there is a need to change the DVD? President, Litcologia, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon to everyone here. Good afternoon, witness. I'm going to close this day with very few questions. And my first question is, were you a member or are you a member of the French Communist Party or a sympathizer?
No, I am not.
Deuxième question.
Question number 2. Do you know for which crimes Mr. Khieu Samphan is accused?
I know that he accused of committing the crimes, but of course it is up to the court to find the truth. In particular, please try to find the evidence.
That was not the question I was asking you. I was asking you, which crimes is Mr. Khieu Samphan being prosecuted for before this chamber?
I don't have any document with me, but only heard that through the media he was accused of other crimes, including the genocide. That is a war crime and genocide. But I don't have any concrete court document with me.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Well, of course, you can check the indictment on the court's website, but my penultimate question, Mr. Witness, during your 4 encounters with Mr. Kyo Sompong, can you tell us briefly what the topics are that you discussed?
For the first meeting in 1974, it was not a one-to-one meeting, it was a group meeting, and it was rather brief when we were in Bucharest city. It was just a casual meeting, asking one another about how we did, and he spoke about the resistance, about the situation in the country. And in 1989, that is the second meeting in Paris, his role was to attend the meeting in preparation for the Paris Peace Agreement in Paris. And at that time, the meeting was also brief. It was a cordial meeting. And I'd like to remind you that at that time I also followed the news regarding the process of the Paris Peace Agreement, and Mr. Kyo Sompong was one of the signatories of the agreement, which carries a broad meaning for he himself. And for the third meeting in Thailand, it was during a religious ceremony. I met him at a pagoda, and the fourth meeting was in Long Vang. It was also rather brief. After I left Siem Reap, the meeting was in the afternoon, and it was kind of a cordial meeting.
Thank you, witness. During these 4 encounters you had with Mr. Kyo Sompong, did you notice that Kyo Sompong was trying to hide certain aspects from his life?
It is my understanding, purely my understanding, I did not observe that he attempted to hide anything. And in fact, we put questions to him. How he went by in his day-to-day activities, and about his personal safety, and he said that he had no concern at all. He used public transport, and there is nothing else for me to ask.
Merci.
Thank you, witness. Did you discuss his political role during the period of Democratic Kampuchea?
No, we did not talk much about that. During the chit-chatting, there was no specific subject raised.
Merci.
Thank you for your answer. And my last question, is it fair to say that in reality you know nothing of Kyo Sompong's political role during the period of Democratic Kampuchea?
I did not have the knowledge of his other roles. I only knew of his position in the diplomatic nature, and that he was in a nominal position, and that's all.
Merci.
Thank you, witness. And as a conclusion, do you believe that you learned anything during today's hearing, and did you learn anything about Mr. Kirsampan's role during the period of Democratic Kampuchea?
I do not have anything else to add. His main role during the time was the president of the state presidium, and as I stated earlier, the West, the media and the press spoke of his role, which was of its nominal nature.
I have no further questions. Thank you, witness.
President, thank you. Mr. Chao Sakun, the hearing of your testimony has now concluded. The bench and the parties have no further questions for you, and we are grateful for you that you spent your valuable time for this afternoon proceeding with patience and effort. Your testimony may contribute to understanding the truth in this case, and we wish you all the best, good health and prosperity. And goodbye, Mr. Chao Sakun. Witness. Thank you, Mr. President. Goodbye. AV unit, you may now disconnect the teleconferencing from France. The proceeding today has come to an end, and we will adjourn now, and we will resume tomorrow morning, that is Thursday, the 23rd of May 2013, commencing from 9 a.m. And for tomorrow, we will hear the testimony of TCCP 187. And the civil party will be questioned first by Kills and Punch defense team. This is information for the publics and for the parties. Security guards, you are instructed to take the two accused back to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom tomorrow morning prior to 9 a.m. As for Noon Chia, bring him to the holding cell downstairs, which is equipped with audio-visual equipment for him to follow the proceedings. The court is now adjourned.